2. Welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to decipher the extremely complicated developments at Genoa City. There are many rumors swirling around the Newman family, but what is the truth? In this video, I'll summarize the confirmed spoilers for next week and also offer some personal theories about the increasingly tense situation between Billy and Jill. The tragedy of Billy and Jill lies precisely in that it's no longer a typical mother-son quarrel, nor a familiar cycle where Billy causes trouble, promises to change, and then hesitates before the moment of accountability. This time, the weariness has gone further than ever. It permeates Jill's reflection on her life, on the path she's taken to build power, wealth, and position in Chancellor, and then realizes that the son she once wanted to protect, once wanted to save, once forgave, is the very person who has exhausted her the most. Billy wasn't unaware that Jill was in London with her health deteriorating. He wasn't unaware that heart disease at this age was no longer a detail to be postponed or taken lightly. Nor could he pretend not to hear the urgency in Sally's advice, not to recognize the very real worrying hidden behind the toughness of those around him as they urged him to see his mother before it was too late. But Billy's inherent weakness was never that he didn't understand the problem. His weakness was that he always understood too late, always letting fleeting emotions, pride, confusion, and avoidance instincts push him away from what needed to be done. He was the kind of person who could genuinely love his family but acted as if that love wasn't important enough to compel him to act at the right time. This paradox destroyed Billy from the inside out, and it was this very thing that ultimately led Jill to a decision she probably never thought she would actually make. When Billy once again refused to go to London. What was hurt wasn't just the feelings of a mother waiting for her son to appear at her bedside or in a quiet room where she needed to feel her family was still there. What was more deeply eroded was the last shred of faith Jill still held. Jill had witnessed Billy stumble, seen her son rush into impulsive decisions, destroying his own opportunities, and then waited for some miracle to fix the consequences. She had been angry, scolded, and disappointed, but somewhere within Jill, there was always a glimmer of hope. She still believed that at some point, Billy would understand what was irreplaceable. But when that moment arrived in the form of illness, age, and a silent call for a real response, Billy still chose to stand still. That very moment transformed all her past disappointments into a cold conclusion. Jill didn't cut ties with Billy out of anger. If it were just anger, that anger would have passed, as it had many times before. What was more frightening was that she cut ties with him in a state of exhaustion, a state where she no longer had the strength to continue being disappointed. There is a vast difference between a mother who is still angry and a mother who has reached the limit of her endurance. Anger is still a form of clinging because it shows that one still expects the other person, still wants them to change, still hurts because they think things could have been different. But exhaustion is different. Exhaustion is when the heart forces itself to become numb in order to survive. And that's where Jill stood when she called Billy to inform him that all personal and financial ties between them were over. On the surface, that decision sounded like a sentence. But on a deeper level, it was like a psychological surgery Jill had to undergo to cut away the pain that had lasted too long. She no longer wanted to use money as an invisible thread connecting Billy to responsibility. She no longer wanted the Chancellor's power to become an excuse for him to continue living in the illusion that no matter how much he messed things up, a family network would ultimately keep him from falling too deep. Jill understood very well the bitter truth that prolonged pity sometimes doesn't save anyone, but only delays their growth. For years, she was both his mother, his corrector, and the last break preventing Billy from self-destructing. But the more she did this, the more she contributed to turning his chaos into a tolerated habit. When her heart condition brought Jill closer to the limitations of her own time, she no longer wanted to carry that burden. For Billy, that phone call wasn't just bad news. It was a direct blow to the very core of his being that he tried to keep intact. Billy might be used to criticism, doubt, and being seen as a perpetual failure, but deep down, he still believed Jill would never truly leave him. That's the most dangerous belief of those who are often forgiven. They begin to confuse unconditional love with immunity from consequences. Billy had lived too long in that ambiguity. He could resist, he could ignore, he could procrastinate, because he always thought there was always a way out. Jill would scold him, be disappointed, even cut off financial support for a while, but the door would always open again. Only when Jill made it clear that this time it was over did Billy have to confront what he'd been avoiding all along. Some relationships don't die because of one big mistake, but because of countless instances where people aren't there when they're needed most. What makes this tragedy even more painful is that Billy wasn't completely emotionless. If he were, the story would be much simpler. But Billy is the kind of person whose emotions are too strong, too real, too impulsive, to the point that they often push him away from the right course of action. He might feel remorse. He might know he should go to London. He might understand Sally correctly. He might sense time running out. But instead of turning all that awareness into a decisive decision, he lets himself be overwhelmed by a mess of guilt, self-pity, and the fear of facing his mother without having proven anything. Perhaps Billy fears seeing in Jill's eyes not only illness, but also ultimate disappointment. Perhaps he fears that the trip will force him to admit that he has wasted too many years. Perhaps he fears a meeting where he can no longer use promises or excuses to delay the truth. But whatever the fear, it doesn't change the outcome. In a family, hesitation can sometimes be just as cruel as decisive action. As for Jill, I think the most pitiable thing about her isn't her illness, but the fact that she has to use her toughness to mask the pain of a mother. This woman surely didn't want her life, after so many hardships, to end up having to rewrite her will as a way of telling her son that she no longer trusts him. It's a huge emotional failure, even though she has every reason to do so. Perhaps Jill will still hurt after hanging up. Perhaps her already fragile heart will be weighed down even more by that decision. But sometimes adults have to choose a decisive pain to avoid being worn down by an endless, prolonged pain. Jill is doing just that. She's turning herself into a cruel person so as not to continue being exhausted. As for Billy, what makes me both angry and sympathetic about this character is that he always gives the impression that he's just one step away from becoming a better version of himself. Yet he keeps pulling himself back at the crucial moment. The disappointment with Billy stems from seeing his potential, his very human vulnerability, his capacity for love, only to witness him ruin everything because he lacks the courage to overcome his ego and fear. He's the kind of character that leaves viewers exhausted, yet also hard to let go of, because beneath all those flaws is a person clumsily struggling to become better, never quite succeeding. And perhaps that's what resonates most strongly after this story, not Jill's punishment, nor the inheritance that will go to Johnny and Katie, but the heavy feeling of a family crossing the line of forgiveness into the cold ground of consequences. There are wounds that don't need exaggeration to be haunting, because they are so close to real life: a phone call, a rejected trip, an amended will, a weary mother, a son who's a step behind. Just these things alone are enough to create an emotional earthquake. And honestly, what saddens me most isn't that Jill cut Billy out of her life, but the feeling that she must have suffered for a long time before she was cold enough to do so. And Billy, if he truly lost his mother in this way, then no matter what he regains later, there will always be a void in his heart. A void shaped like the trip to London he didn't take when he could have. On our channel, I always seek content inspiration for each video by compiling short video clips to analyze and offer my personal opinions. This channel specializes in analyzing, hypothesizing, and discussing plot points in the Young and the Restless series from the perspective of a longtime fan. Through this, viewers can gain deeper, more objective, and interesting perspectives. What are you waiting for to happen to Lily in the next episode of the series? Subscribe to the channel to stay updated on the latest news about the Young and the Restless series.